Speaker Sexton, thank you so much for joining us on our Marsy's Law interview series, Why We Do What We Do. We are actively in Tennessee, we being Marsy's Law. Marsy's Law for Tennessee has been up and moving for a while now. We've been blessed to find leaders like yourself that I've had the opportunity to have on this interview series, and we're so happy that you, as the speaker, by the way, congratulations for being elected speaker again for another
Well,
two
thank you.
years. I've had the privilege of having a lot of legislators from Tennessee that have been helpful with us. Senator Stevens, Representative Hazelwood, Senator Lundberg, and then some leaders that I know have been in your office on Capitol Hill days. Verna Wyatt from the Tennessee Voices for Victims, the Tennessee Coalition to End Domestic and Sexual Violence. Jennifer Eskew, the head of that, has talked about how I've seen how they have been up on the Hill, and with leaders like you who are so interested and passionate, we are so blessed to be in the state of Tennessee and trying to get Marsy's Law passed and get it on the ballot so that the people can bring constitutional rights for victims to the state of Tennessee. Having said that, could you just tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into public service and why this particular issue and speaking up on behalf of victims and families and survivors is important?
Yeah, look, I worked on campaigns ever since I graduated college a long time ago, and liked working with elected officials and trying to get people I thought that should be elected. Sometimes I was successful, sometimes I wasn't. And then they just kind of bled into, I got out of it for about a decade and started into working for more in sales and marketing for businesses. And there was an opportunity locally to run for state rep. At that time, the community didn't feel like that person was representing their interests. Maybe they were representing their own interests more. And so we started a campaign. We were very fortunate to get elected in 2010 and started in 2011. Been in the General Assembly ever since. Been Speaker since 2019. Seems a lot longer than 5 years. But, I mean, look, I think when I got into talking about criminal justice, it seemed like to me that on various bills I've done, including working on Marsy's Law here, is criminals have more rights than the victims, and victims were often overlooked, left behind, a silent part of the whole equation when they should be the one that should have the most voice. And so trying to right that ship in Tennessee, we've done a lot of things in the last couple of years, but Marsy's Law is another step to take to give victims their voice back.
Yeah, and for those of us for those who will watch this who aren't as schooled in the machinery of legislative legislative priorities and how things like that get passed, specifically constitutional amendments, could you give us a quick little education on what you're doing and the steps that Marsy's Law has taken and the steps that need to be taken to get it on the ballot in front of the people?
Yeah, Tennessee is a little different than most states. You have to pass it in two consecutive General Assemblies over a 4-year period. Each General Assembly is 2 years. So you got to go through the committee system the first time. You have to get majority votes on the House floor the first 2-year period. The second 2-year period, you go back to the floor. You have to get 2/3 majority to support the amendment to get it on the ballot. And then it goes on the ballot. We only have constitutional amendments when the governor is running, not when other elections are happening. So that's why it's a little bit different. But then even the process of how it becomes a part of the Constitution is a little quirky here in Tennessee, which is you have to get 50% plus one vote of the governor's race. So, for example, if 1 million people voted in the governor's race, then you would need 500,001 vote. But let's say that you got 350,000 and 10 people voted against it. You didn't get the total number of votes that you needed. So it's not just a majority once it gets on the ballot. You have to get that threshold of votes that are in the governor's race, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get a constitutional amendment passed in Tennessee.
Yeah, and that's why once it does hopefully succeed and get passed, that is what is a benefit of actually of your process in Tennessee, because then it really is something that reflects the will of the people of Tennessee.
Yes.
There's no question when something successfully gets passed as a constitutional amendment in Tennessee that people have had their voices heard on something that's so important, and that's the way that it should be. So, um, could you tell us a little bit about how you started to? I mean, I'm sure that you have so many people who are coming to your office that are trying to get some time with you to talk about what is important to them and the issues that are important to them. Um, and we have been so grateful that you have been open to listening to Marcy's Law and our representatives. I know Bonnie Brzezina is doing an incredible job in the state of Tennessee, and she has spoken with you extensively about the importance of it. And she has just said, you know, your leadership speaks volumes because when people see you setting the example as the speaker, it's certainly helpful across the state. Could you tell us a little bit about why this is important in the state of Tennessee? You're talking about how sometimes the criminals seem to be people seem to think that the criminals have all of the rights. Tell us a little bit about why public safety has kind of jumped to the forefront in Tennessee over the last several years from where you sit.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And Bonnie's a great person. I've known her for years, and it's been a joy to work with her on this part of Marcy's Law with her. Look, you know, I think almost everybody in their life has been a victim of crime, some more violent than others potentially. I mean, even when I was growing up, we had someone who broke into our house and stole a lot of stuff. And I remember when I was maybe 10 years old, what that felt like and kind of the violation of what that was. And, you know, and so I don't remember if there was ever an arrest or anything like that. That escapes me, but I do remember the feeling of wondering if they were ever coming back. And, you know, when we're faced with after COVID, you saw crime going up, you saw schools shutting down, you saw more gang activity, and crime was going through the roof. And then you were watching in some blue states where they were trying to defund the police and do social working and not promote and protect law enforcement. It created a lot of issues. And so we started looking at ways to how do we crack down on criminals and protect victims? That's really what it was about. And one of the nice things about being speaker is it does allow me to go across the state and talk to various people. And so we talk to law enforcement, we talk to advocacy groups, we've talked to victims of crime, so we talk to judges and all about the criminal justice system and what we can do. And the one thing that always came back, regardless of who you talk about, is they wanted to protect victims. And a lot of times the criminal justice system doesn't protect victims. It does the opposite. And so protecting victims meant, one, is holding the criminal accountable. Two, allowing the victims to understand the process and what was going on. You know, not finding out that someone only served a year and a half of a 10-year sentence and they see them at Walmart and all of a sudden they're surprised and there's that person that violated them or victimized them, or even being out on bail. And so trying to put in things into the system that would protect victims first, but give them the capability of understanding what was going on and that they had awareness and transparency in the process was very important for us.
Yeah, and it seems that you've been very successful, even during your term as speaker, in creating a culture that protects victims and protects families and protects survivors, which started a few years ago, with truth in sentencing. Could you tell us a little bit about how the great work that you guys have done on getting truth in sentencing passed and what that means in practicality, and how that will work well with some of the components of Marcy's Law, specifically, like you were talking about victims being notified of when people are out on bail?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, I mean, I keep seeing the news stories, whether, you know, it's on social media or the TV or in print or another mechanism, about criminals who are repeat offenders. And you're sitting there watching, how is someone able to rape four people? How are they able to carjack multiple people? How are they able to attempt to kill multiple people? And they're still out running amongst the public. Like, how is that possible? And we started seeing more and more of that. And so, you know, I started talking to individuals and started talking to victims, and victims are like, no one ever talks to us. Once the trial's over, it all goes away. But even during that trial process, there's not a lot of communication unless they want me to testify, or just, we're going to start the trial on this date and we're going to do this. and that's not total communication that they need to have. And what the other thing we heard from victims when we were talking about truth in sentencing, look, we're the first state in America that says whatever the judge or jury gives you, you serve 100% for a violent crime. It's laid out in statute. You even if you have good credit, it does not apply. If you get 10 years, it means you serve every single day of 10 years. And I will tell you, we had a lot of soft on crime groups coming after us, saying that we're mean and we're evil. All we're trying to do is protect victims and hold criminals accountable. But when we talk to victims all the time, what they always talked about was, well, they got out on bail and I didn't know it. And I should have known because I should be able to protect myself and my family because I thought they were locked up, but they're not. Or they would say, you know what? I thought they were going to get 10 years and they were out in a year and a half. And that's a problem. And then the third part, really what victims also said is when those individuals come up for parole and they don't have truth in sentencing, it's like they have to relive that crime over and over and over again to defend their right to hold that criminal accountable to keep them in jail. And so when you look at all that taken together, how can a victim overcome what happened to them if they're constantly having to relive it every few years? And so part of it was trying to get closure to victims too, with truth in sentencing and Marsy's law and trying to get it all worked together. You want the victims to have closure at some point in the criminal justice system. And here in Tennessee and in many other states, it just was not happening.
Yeah, and I think the work that you have done with truth in sentencing and now with Marsy's law goes to we talk about closure, but really to peace of mind and to peace of mind for victims and for their families. One thing that that I noticed time and time again in my work as a prosecutor is uh, this is a real foreign system for people to navigate. And not only is it a brand new system for them to navigate, but they're navigating it at probably one of the most traumatic and vulnerable times in their life. So they have um, they are introduced to the court system, and everything happens so quickly, and they are watching the case go by, and sometimes they're in the hallway, and a case is resolved, and it takes some time and some explaining and quite frankly some handholding for a victim to understand what the process is. And it is very easy in busy district attorneys' offices and busy prosecutors' offices for these cases that, especially in a busy courtroom in an urban setting, for these victims to feel like they are out of the loop and they don't know what's going on. And God forbid it's a case where there's a violent criminal who is out there, who is out on bail, and they have no idea. So that is what is so important about Marsy's law, is for victims to know that they have enforceable constitutional rights, that they are required now constitutionally, that the people in the system are required to make sure that they're kept in the loop, that the victims are kept in the loop. And like you said, that the case is not over just when the sentencing happens, because there's still parole and there's parole eligibility. And I think when a lot of times when you said this, the soft on crime lobby, so to speak, would come and talk to you and talk to your office about truth in sentencing and how it's not the right thing to do. A lot of times what the pushback will be with respect to Marsy's law, when you start talking about constitutional rights for victims, they think that they view this as victims' rights or constitutional rights being a zero-sum game, so that this is going to affect defendants' constitutional rights. And nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing touches the constitutional rights that defendants are afforded under the United States and state constitutions. All this does is make sure that victims also have enforceable constitutional rights. And where could you tell us, where does it stand now in Tennessee? What are the next steps to get Marsy's law passed in Tennessee?
Yeah, so it will be back up this General Assembly for the second time, and so it'll be on the floor where we should be able to get 2/3 vote to get it passed, and then it would move to the ballot in the governor's race in 2026, and so that's where I'm hoping it will get to. You know, you're exactly right. I mean, look, it's like, you know, criminals have due process. Criminals have all these rights, and they don't have to incriminate themselves. They can do whatever they want to. and they have all that afforded to them in the court of law. If they can't afford an attorney, they get an attorney. But what is the victims afforded? What rights do they have? And so we're just trying, as you said very eloquently, to say that victims do have some constitutional rights that they should be able to have. And the reason you want to put it in the Constitution is because that's the hardest way to ever change anything, whether you want to put it in or take it out. And so the best way to protect victims in the future in Tennessee is to put it in the state constitution, because it's very difficult. And so being very difficult, that makes it harder for someone to take out. And so that's why we wanted to put it in the Constitution.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point you make, Mr. Speaker, is rather than have it in statute only, when rights are in the Constitution and enforceable as constitutional rights, it's different, and it's also not up to the whim of any state legislature or the next elected state legislature that could change it really at any time. You've already detailed how difficult a process it is to get something amended in the state constitution. And by its very definition, the process speaks to the fact that this is consensus. This
Right.
reflects the will of the people. And it's not something that can change every couple of years. And that's just shows how important it is to the people of Tennessee, and how important and how serious you take it as an elected official and as a leader. One thing I will say is that we were able to give you one of our Champion of Victims' Rights Awards from Marsy's Law, for being so helpful to us, and we're so grateful. But the other thing I wanted to say is, with you and some of the people that I have just spoken about, some of the elected officials that I've had a chance to meet with and have on this interview series, and the people who are from the different coalitions and the different advocacy groups, and the prosecutors, and these are some incredibly passionate people.
Mhm.
I have been absolutely blown away with the work that all of you do and the passion that you bring to it on behalf of victims and their families. Um, Tennessee is a real special place, and we are so grateful that we've been able to come to a state like Tennessee and get the support that we've gotten from people like you.
Well, I appreciate it. Everybody plays a key part in being successful. It's not just one person. It's the Marsy Laws group that brought this out, and the instance that led to the incorporation of what Marsy Laws is and trying to get states to pass it, and legislators who listen and understand it, legislators and people who are willing to vote for it and take a stand with it. It all comes hand in hand, and we all work together to do it. What I tell my members in the House is, when you're looking at an issue, all you have to do is go talk to enough people. And whether I'm talking to somebody in Memphis or Nashville or rural county where I live, like Cumberland County and Crossville, or in Johnson County up in upper East Tennessee, if you talk to enough people, the same issues will come back to you 5 to 6 times. And so all you have to do is willing to listen. And as elected officials, we should be willing to listen more than we talk. I know that's kind of hard sometimes. But what I started hearing, look, I was trying to go after the criminals in truth and sentencing. I was trying to hold them accountable because I was tired of seeing them get out. But what came about it was talking to all the victims and the victims groups and the other issues, whether it was about bail or about transparency in the process with Marsy's Law and giving peace of mind, but our bail reform package, or about, we also passed legislation that said, let's say that you're not a violent criminal and you didn't fall into the truth and sentencing model. When the judge sentences you now in the state of Tennessee, and they say you're going to get 6 years in court, they have to tell everybody in court, which would include the victim's family, that means this person could be out in 3 years. Once again, giving relief to the individual so they understand what could happen. Because if you don't tell people what is possible, they never understand what it's going to look like. And so that's where we're trying to do both. And we should do everything we can to stand with victims every single day. But if you talk to them, it will be very clear on the issues that we need to address. And Marsy Law is a very big one for them.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the really important components is judges are required to participate consistent with the law,
Right.
and they give information, which is quite frankly empowering, I think, to victims to have that knowledge, and it gives them a certain sense of security because in a time where everything seems to have been absolutely tipped upside down in their life, it helps to know what to expect.
Right.
Because, like you said, when you were a little boy and that thing happened to your house, you had no idea if that person was going to come back.
Right.
And it's the same thing. You have no idea. All of a sudden, their trust in humanity has been shattered.
Hmm.
And so, for people to say, this is what you can expect, and this is what you're entitled to under the Constitution, I think gives them a little bit, at least a little bit of solace. The other thing I just wanted to close with this was um, I've spoken with a lot of survivors in the state of Tennessee and family members whose children have been murdered and who have taken that tragedy and turned it, sometimes they'll refer to as turning their pain into purpose. And they've channeled that into trying to help other families and other survivors and forming groups and different events and raising money. And um, to a person, they've all felt so supported by the leadership in the state and people like you. And I know some of them have worked specifically with you in your office, and they are so grateful, like we are, for your leadership. So thank you again for all that you're doing. I look forward to continuing our work with you as this session goes on, and then ultimately when we get it to the ballot.
Well, thank you. It's very kind of you saying, look, I appreciate you sharing that. A lot of times elected officials, we hear the bad. We never hear the people say the good stuff. And so I appreciate you sharing that with us. And look, we're trying to make a difference and you're all trying to make a difference. And the good news is we're partnering to do that. And I look forward to what the future holds for us as well.
I appreciate it. I appreciate your working with us, and I appreciate the partnership.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you.